Well now, before we settle in, if you enjoy these quiet little stories, do an old man a kindness. Give it a like and subscribe if you'd like to hear another one tomorrow night. All right then, let's begin. There are villages you can find on maps, tucked between the folds of mountains or brushing the edge of rivers. But some villages are tucked between folds of time. And those, dear heart, are harder to find. The village of Nettlebed Hollow was such a place. It was not marked on any compass, nor listed on any schedule. Trains passed nearby, but never stopped. Roads curved as though approaching, then turned coyly away. And if you walked the path through Wimberley Wood with your mind full of errands or worries, you would never see the crooked sign that read, "This way to Nettlebed Hollow, if it's your time." But Ansel Merriweather saw it. He wasn't looking for it, not exactly. He had no errands and few worries, but he did have a suitcase with one good handle, a satchel full of pressed wildflowers, and a watch that had stopped ticking 3 months ago and refused all efforts to tick again. He had also recently turned 11. That morning, Ansel had kissed his aunt and uncle good-bye with polite affection, for they had been kind enough, though busy. They had taken him in after his mother's passing and had filled the silence with recipes and folded laundry, but not much listening. So when Ansel told them he was going to visit the village with the ticking trees, they had merely said, "Be back for supper if you can," and he had gone. Down the lane, past the weather vane that never spun, through Wimberley Wood where the bluebells never wilted, and straight into the mist that curled like the breath of something old and thoughtful. That was when he saw the sign, and that was when he stepped off the path. Nettlebed Hollow did not look remarkable at first. It was a little crooked, as though the land had shrugged once, long ago, and the houses had simply gone along with it. Chimneys leaned in like gossiping old friends, shutters clapped softly in the breeze, and the cobblestones hummed beneath your boots if you stood still long enough. The air had a scent, a blend of beeswax, copper, and something older, something like paper that had been read too many times and loved for it. Ansel walked slowly, his suitcase bumping the ground, the wildflowers peeking out of his satchel like timid scouts. He passed a baker's shop with loaves shaped like stars, a post office with no hours listed, only soon, and a well with steam curling from its stones. And then, at the end of a narrow lane where moss grew in the mortar and birds sang lullabies, he saw the house. It was taller than the others, narrow with 3 chimneys, one of which puffed silver smoke, windows of stained glass shaped like clock faces, and a front door made of dark oak carved with tiny moons. On the front step sat a wooden sign. Painted in gold, it read, "T. Ellowen, Clockmaker and other repairs, appointments offered when the time is right." Ansel stood very still. The house was ticking, not loudly, not harshly, just enough to feel it in his bones, a soft, rhythmic pulse like a heartbeat, like time thinking, like something waiting. He knocked. The sound echoed, not through the house, but through him. It made the soles of his feet tingle and his stopped watch give the faintest flutter. The door opened. The man who stood on the threshold was neither tall nor stooped, neither young nor entirely old. His hair was silver in streaks like pencil sketches, and his spectacles clicked softly when he blinked. He wore a waistcoat embroidered with tiny gears, and his eyes were the color of walnut shells and deep mornings. He looked at Ansel for a long moment, then said, "You're 3 minutes early. "Should I go away and come back?" Ansel asked politely. The man blinked. "Number. That's how I know you're right on time." He stepped aside. Ansel entered the house with the ticking heart. The clockmaker's house was unlike any place Ansel had ever seen. It was not cluttered, as he had imagined it might be, but precise. Everything had a place, and every place had a sound. Clocks of every shape lined the walls, pendulum clocks, carriage clocks, cuckoos that blinked instead of calling, sand glasses that refilled themselves when turned, and none of them ticked in quite the same rhythm. But somehow, together, they created a harmony that soothed more than confused. The walls were paneled in warm wood, and overhead, beams bore carvings of vines, stars, and tiny animals, with the bodies of foxes and the wings of birds. The man led Ansel to a chair beside the hearth. It was cushioned in red velvet and shaped like a question mark. "Sit," he said. "Would you like tea?" "Yes, please." The man turned a knob of the mantel. Somewhere a kettle sighed. Ansel set down his suitcase. His watch buzzed once in his pocket, just a flicker, and then stilled again. "I'm Ansel Merriweather," he offered. "I'm Tomlin Ellowen," said the man, "but the clocks call me Thorn." "Is that your real name?" Thorn's eyes twinkled. "Depends which moment you ask me in." Ansel smiled, and a warmth uncurled in his chest. Thorn poured tea, dark amber, with a scent like burnt sugar and pine, and added exactly one slice of apple to each cup. They drank in silence. Then Thorn asked, "Why did you come?" Ansel thought for a moment. "My watch stopped, but I think that's not the only thing that did." Thorn nodded. "What do you hear?" Ansel listened. Tick, tick, tock, tock. And beneath it, something softer, like a whisper, in a language he almost understood. "I hear. Wanting," he said at last, "like something's waiting to be remembered." Thorn smiled. "That's the house. It remembers everything, even what was forgotten." After tea, Thorn showed Ansel the workshop. It was behind a heavy curtain, through a hallway lined with portraits that moved only when you weren't looking. The workshop smelled of brass and cedar and faintly of rain. On one table lay a clock shaped like a fish. On another, a small wooden bird with tiny clock hands for eyes. There were shelves of springs, drawers of keys, and a wall of ticking hearts, not real ones, but mechanical, some shaped like acorns, others like moths. Ansel stepped reverently. "What do you fix here?" he whispered. Thorn shrugged. "Clocks, sometimes hearts, occasionally time itself." Ansel's eyes widened. Thorn lifted a velvet cloth. Beneath it was a large book, bound in silver thread. "This is the Book of Broken Hours," he said. "When a moment goes missing or a minute stumbles, it writes itself in here. Then I find the piece that slipped and mend it." "Do minutes really get lost?" "Oh, yes. Every time someone says, 'Where did the time go?' it goes here." Ansel leaned closer. On the page, written in curling ink, he saw 12:03, May 11th, lost in a sigh beside the railway fence, not retrieved, and beneath it 4:59, March 2nd, slipped between pages 52 and 53 of the Green Atlas, waiting to be noticed. "I didn't know time could hide." "Time," Thorn said gently, "doesn't care to be noticed, but it loves to be remembered." Ansel nodded slowly. "I think I'd like to remember more things," he said. Thorn placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then you've come to the right house." The afternoon faded like old parchment. Ansel helped polish gears and sort ticking beetles into labeled boxes. He listened to a cuckoo recite a poem backwards. He watched Thorn reassemble a sorrow clock for a woman who had misplaced her wedding laughter. And when the village bells rang 7, though no one had rung them, Thorn said, "It's time." "For what?" "For your first repair." They climbed a narrow stair to the attic. It was colder here, though not unkindly so. Light filtered through porthole windows. In the center stood a tall glass cabinet. Inside it, floating in soft blue light, was a clock. But not just any clock. It had no numbers, no hands, no pendulum. It simply glowed. "This is the hollow clock," Thorn said. "It doesn't measure time. It listens to it." Ansel stepped closer. His breath fogged the glass. "But it's silent," he whispered, "because something's missing." Thorn reached into his coat and pulled out a small velvet pouch. He handed it to Ansel. Inside was a gear, no larger than a coin, but warm. It pulsed. "It only fits if you know where it belongs," Thorn said. Ansel stared at it. He felt the ticking of the house in his bones, the hush of the workshop in his lungs, the hush of his mother's voice long ago, reading beside a rain-fogged window. He turned to the hollow clock. There, a space, half hidden beneath a curve of glass. He pressed the gear into place. It clicked, and the clock began to hum, then tick, then whisper. The air shimmered. For a moment, Ansel saw, just barely, a figure standing beside the clock. Not Thorn, a woman, smiling, holding a child's hand. Then it faded, and the hollow clock ticked on. Ansel turned to Thorn. "That was my mother," he whispered. Thorn nodded. "She planted a memory here once," he said. "You just let it bloom." The house glowed warmly that night. Ansel sat in the red velvet chair, a plate of pear tart in his lap, his watch ticking faintly for the first time in months. Thorn sipped tea beside him, and somewhere in the walls 100 clocks whispered welcome. On the morning after the hollow clock ticked for the first time in years, the light in Nettlebed Hollow was different. It wasn't brighter nor darker, but warmer, as if time itself had exhaled in relief. The mist that normally clung to rooftops like lazy cats had lifted just a little, and the clocks in Mr. Tallaby's bakery were all perfectly in sync for the first time since the gingerbread flood of '32. A quiet disaster, very little discussed. Ansel woke in the guest room above the workshop, in a bed shaped like an hourglass, beneath a quilt stitched with the constellations he did not know the names of. The ticking of the house still hummed softly in his bones. He felt more rested than he could remember feeling in months, though he could not say why. He dressed quickly, vest, satchel, watch, still ticking, and boots, and padded down the curved stairway that whispered underfoot. Thorn was already at the hearth, poring over a pocket-sized notebook and sipping from a chipped mug that occasionally refilled itself with steam from nowhere in particular. "Morning, lad," he said. "You're up early?" "I heard the ticking in my sleep," Ansel said. "It's like a lullaby." Thorn smiled. "That's the house saying thank you." "For the hollow clock?" "And for remembering," Thorn said, tapping the notebook. "The house remembers more easily now, and so does the hollow." Breakfast was toasted oat cake with lemon marmalade and a slice of apple. It was Thorn's belief that no proper day could begin without one fruit, one grain, and something just a little bitter to keep you honest. After breakfast, Ansel followed Thorn to the back of the workshop, past the glass drawers of whispering keys and the spiraling staircase that led, according to a carved sign, to rooms uncounted. There was a wall Ansel hadn't noticed before. It was covered entirely in paper, maps, letters, diagrams, time charts, and swirling sketches that looked like someone had tried to draw the sound of memory. In the center of the wall was a wide parchment pinned with brass tacks and a single ribbon of red thread. Ansel leaned in. "It's a map," he whispered. "Yes," Thorn said, "but not of places." "What then?" Thorn pointed to the title, inked in curling script at the top, "The Map of Forgotten Hours." The map shimmered. At first glance, it looked like a field of constellations, or a very old treasure map. Loops and curls, symbols instead of names, patches of color that seemed to shift when not looked at directly. Each dot had a time next to it. 12-17-3-057-46, and beside each time a tiny note. Sighed away in a field of thistles, lingered in the breath between "I love you" and the answer. Lost behind a grandfather clock in a rainy house. Ansel's fingers hovered over one. It read 4:06, forgotten on the bridge, still echoing, and beneath it just 3 small words, "Bring it back." Thorn placed a hand on Ansel's shoulder. "The hollow has been unwell," he said softly. "Too many moments have gone missing. They leave gaps, places that don't remember how to be." Ansel looked up. "Can I help?" Thorn gave him a key. Silver, long, and shaped like a dragonfly. "You can do more than help. You can retrieve." They left the shop just before noon, the sun hovering like a pocket watch held up to the sky. Thorn handed Ansel a small compass. "This doesn't point north," he said. "It points when?" Ansel blinked. The arrow inside the compass spun gently, then settled on a curve marked with the symbol for 4:06. He followed it, through the edge of the hollow, past windows that winked, past children drawing chalk spirals on cobbles, past a tree that bloomed only for goodbyes, and finally to a small arched bridge over a stream that flowed not with water, but with something slower. The stream shimmered with colors that changed depending on how you looked at them, sometimes amber, sometimes ink. It gurgled faintly with soft echoes, as though it were speaking in dreams. Ansel stood on the bridge. The compass spun, then stopped. He looked around. Nothing seemed out of place, but when he stepped to the center of the bridge, he felt it. A tug, not on his body, on his memory. He blinked. For just a moment, he wasn't sure where he'd been going, or why. The compass pulsed once in his palm. The pocket watch in his vest stilled. Ansel took a breath. "I'm here for the hour," he said aloud. The air shifted. The bridge sighed, and from the far railing something fluttered, a slip of parchment caught in a crack. Ansel reached for it. It read, "Waited. You didn't come. Still waiting." His throat tightened, and then a chime, software clear. From the other end of the bridge, a figure appeared, small, hazy, a boy, maybe 10, sitting, knees hugged to chest, not quite real, not quite gone. Ansel stepped toward him. "Are you the hour?" he asked. The boy looked up. His eyes were hollow, but not empty, echoing. "You left me," he said. "I didn't mean to." "No one means to," the boy said, voice thin. "But time went on without me, and I stayed." Ansel crouched down. "I came back for you," he said. "I heard the ticking. I followed the map." The boy tilted his head. "Do you remember me?" Ansel hesitated. He didn't, but he felt something. A quiet sadness, a missed birthday, a forgotten promise, and a name. "Call him," he said. The figure blinked once, then smiled. The hour shifted. A ripple of light pulsed outward. Ansel staggered, caught his breath, and the figure was gone. But the compass glowed gold. His watch ticked, and a thread of silver light spiraled around the bridge railing, vanishing into the stream below. When he returned to the shop, Thorn was waiting. Ansel placed the compass on the desk. "The hour came back," he said. Thorn nodded. "And so did the moment." He pointed at the map. Where once the hour had been a gray smudge, it now gleamed softly. Ansel stared. The note had changed. Now it read, "Found on the bridge, remembered with care." That night, Ansel sat by the fire, sipping honey tea. Thorn placed a new book in his lap. It was blank, on the cover, "Hours I've Carried." "For you to fill," Thorn said. "You'll be needing it." "Are there more?" "Always," Thorn said. "Time drops crumbs. You'll follow them." Ansel nodded slowly. "I think I want to be a clockmaker one day," he said. Thorn smiled. "You already are." Outside, the hollow chimed, softly, like laughter just remembered. The hollow's clock struck a peculiar rhythm the next morning. Not louder or faster, just curious. The sort of rhythm that made leaves turn slightly toward the sound, and which caused Miss Crimley's dog to lift its head mid-nap, as if remembering something important it had never learned in the first place. Ansel felt it too. He had dreamed of feathers, white ones, long and delicate, drifting through halls made of time, not falling exactly, but gliding as if on invisible wind. When he woke, one such feather lay on his quilt. No explanation, no bird. He brought it downstairs to Thorn. The clockmaker was elbow-deep in a cuckoo that had begun to sing sea shanties instead of its proper call. His spectacles had slid to the end of his nose, and the tick of the workshop was softer today, as if listening more than speaking. Ansel held up the feather. Thorn set down his tools. "Oh dear," he said softly. In the hollow of Thorn's palm, the feather shimmered. "It's a carry hour," he said. "Some hours don't hide or vanish. They're taken." Ansel blinked. "By who?" "Not who," Thorn said. "What?" He walked to the far wall and pulled down a large drawer, dust clinging to the corners. Inside were dozens of feathers, no two alike, some long and dusky blue, others almost translucent, one striped in black and gold, like a wasp. "These belong to the corvin," he said. Ansel swallowed. "A kind of bird?" "Sort of. They carry time when it tries to run away, especially hours that are heavy, grief, regret, doubt. The corvin collects them. Not to hurt anyone, mind you, just to keep them safe." "But this one," Ansel held up the feather, "it came to me." Thorn nodded. "That means one of your hours is missing." The hour, it turned out, was 2:14. The map confirmed it. A new smudge had appeared beside the sketch of Ansel's room. The note beside it read, 2:14, flown before it could finish, still in flight. Ansel remembered 2:14 the day before. It had been quiet. He was alone in the workshop, polishing a sundial. He had paused, suddenly overcome with the image of his mother brushing his hair back one morning when he was very young. She had said something, but the memory stopped before the words came. Now he realized that hour hadn't just slipped. It had flown. Retrieving a carry hour was different from the bridge moment. It required direction, yes, but also invitation. "Corvin don't respond to calling," Thorn said, rummaging through a cedar chest beneath the stair. "You must earn their attention. Show them that the hour is still needed." He handed Ansel a bell. It was small, silver, and shaped like a thimble. The clapper was a tiny sprig of hollywood. "Ring this where your missing hour was taken," Thorn said, "but do not ask for it back. Ask for the memory it held." "Why?" "Because time can't be owned," Thorn said gently. "Only understood." That afternoon, Ansel returned to the workshop alone. He stood exactly where he'd been at 2:14, The sun filtered through the high windows, dust motes spiraling in golden arcs. He rang the bell once, softly, and waited. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then a sound. Wings. Feathers rustling just beyond sight. He looked up. There, perched on the beam above the main workbench, was a bird. Larger than he expected, sleek and long-necked, with feathers of white and storm gray. Its eyes gleamed like polished obsidian. Its chest bore the faint shimmer of pocket-watch faces, as if it had flown through time itself. The corvin! It tilted its head. Ansel held up the feather. "I think I lost something," he said. The corvin blinked. Then, from beneath its wing, it let fall a shimmer. Not a physical thing, not a clock, but a moment, a wisp of time. Ansel reached out. The memory flooded back. His mother seated on the bed. His child self on the floor, tracing the pattern on a music box. The clock had chimed. She had leaned down, smoothed his hair, and said, "You're allowed to miss things, Ansel, even while you're still holding them." That was the moment. He had forgotten it, carried away before it could finish, and now he remembered. The corvin took flight, not away, but upward, through the rafters, into the beams, through a seam in the ceiling that shimmered like an unspoken goodbye. Ansel rang the bell once more, not in asking, but in thanks. That evening, Thorn and Ansel sat beside the hearth. No tea this time, hot cider, mulled with rosemary and pear. Ansel held the bell, turning it gently in his fingers. "Do hours ever return on their own?" he asked. "Some do," Thorn said. "If they're ready, if we're ready." "And the ones that don't?" Thorn looked at the hearth. "We light lanterns for those, so they can find their way, even if they never come home." Ansel thought of the hollow clock, of the bridge, of the corvin's wings. He reached into his satchel and pulled out a blank page. He wrote, 214, returned by feather, remembered with kindness. Then, beneath it, lantern lit, just in case. Thorn smiled. "You're learning the right kind of remembering." That night, Ansel hung a lantern outside the shop window. Inside it, no flame, just a feather, curled and quiet, glowing faintly with memory. It was a Tuesday when the clock arrived, or at least it said it was. The delivery was peculiar, even by Nettlebed Hollow standards. There was no knock, no footsteps, no shadow slipping by the glass. Just a parcel sitting on the doorstep of the clockmaker's shop when Ansel opened the door for the morning breeze. It was tall, wrapped in pale gray cloth that shimmered oddly as though stitched from cloudlight, and tied with a cord of what looked like starlight, braided with twine. No note, no sender, just a small tag looped to the cord. "For the apprentice, the clock remembers." Ansel's heart thudded softly. He brought it inside. Thorn was standing over a disassembled sand clock shaped like a cat's tail. He looked up when Ansel entered, eyes sharp behind his glasses. "It's come," he said quietly. "You were expecting it?" Thorn didn't answer directly. "Open it, slowly." Ansel did. He unwound the shimmering cloth, lifting it away like the pages of a secret. Underneath was a clock, but not like any he had ever seen. It was tall, thin, and dark, made of a pale wood he couldn't name, carved with swirling, backward-facing vines. Its face had 12 numbers, as expected, but they ran counterclockwise. The hands ticked not forward, but back. The pendulum swayed in reverse, and the keyhole, instead of being in front, was embedded deep within its back, impossible to reach without turning the entire thing around. It ticked softly, and each tick felt like a memory being unwritten. Ansel felt it in his stomach, a subtle pulling sensation, like walking backward through a room you couldn't remember entering. He looked at Thorn. "What is this?" Thorn's expression was unreadable. "It's a reverse keeper," he said at last. "There are only a handful in existence. They don't track hours. They remember futures, possible ones." Ansel's eyes widened. "You mean it tells the future?" "Not the future," Thorn corrected gently. "Just a future. One that was once possible, one that might have been." "Why send it to me?" Thorn was quiet for a long time. Then, very softly, he said, "Because one of your hours is still trying to change the past." They placed the clock in the center of the shop. It ticked backwards, steady, resolute. Around it, the other clocks adjusted subtly, as if shifting to make space, not afraid, just acknowledging. The map of forgotten hours hummed from its wall, and near Ansel's room a smudge reappeared. 3:42, the moment that should not have been, echoing in reverse. Ansel remembered the time. It was the day he left his mother's cottage. There had been a suitcase, a letter, an empty room, and a moment, just before stepping out the door, when he had almost turned back. Almost, but hadn't. That night, Ansel dreamed in reverse. He saw the shop, but as it had been a week ago. He saw himself arriving, heard his own voice speaking backward, laughter running in strange rhythms. He stood beside the reverse keeper. Its hands ticked counterclockwise. As they passed 3:42, the glass shivered, and then the room melted into something else. A cottage, rain, a hand on the doorframe, his mother. Not as she had been, as she might still be. He woke with his hand clenched. In it, the key to the reverse keeper, small, heavy, warm. "You can wind it," Thorn said when Ansel showed him, "but you should only do so if you're willing to see." Ansel nodded. He placed the key in the back of the clock and turned. Time shifted. The tick-tock reversed. The face glowed faintly. And then, from the space behind the clock, so narrow no one could have stood there, a room appeared, dimly lit, not real, not solid, but there. The room from his dream, his mother's sitting room, but not as he remembered it. No dust, no suitcase, no goodbye letter, and on the sofa, knitting a red scarf, a woman with hair like honeyed bark. His mother, as if she had never left. Ansel stepped forward. His foot passed into the light. He was not pulled exactly, but welcomed. He stood in the knot room, in the knot time. His mother looked up, smiled. "Ansel," she said, voice clear, "you're early." He couldn't breathe. He couldn't not breathe. "I missed you," he whispered. "I know," she said. "I missed you too." "I don't understand. Are you real?" Her smile deepened, sorrowful and warm all at once. "I'm a memory of what could have been," she said. "And you've come to change it." He shook his head. "I want to, but I'm afraid I'd lose the rest." "You might," she said gently, "but not all of it. Never all of it." He sat beside her. The scarf she was knitting unraveled even as she wove it. "Would I still come to the hollow?" he asked. "Probably not," she said. "Would I still meet Thorn?" "No." "Would I still find the hollow clock?" She shook her head. He swallowed. "Then I think I have to go." She touched his hand. "And that is why the clock showed me to you, because you were ready to remember, not replace." He cried, softly, for what might have been, for what could never be, for what was. Then he stood. The clock ticked behind him. The image faded, and he was back. Thorn was waiting. He didn't ask. He simply opened his arms, and Ansel fell into them. They sat on the shop floor for a long time. No ticking, only breathing, and the slow, slow forward of real lived time. That evening they placed the reverse keeper back in its box. Thorn wrapped it carefully. "It will go to the next apprentice who tries to reach backward," he said, "and maybe they, too, will learn to walk forward." Ansel nodded. Then he took his book and wrote, 342, the moment that wasn't, remembered with longing, released with love. Beneath it he drew a red scarf, half knitted, half unraveled, still warm. There is a moment in every apprenticeship, be it in magic, music, baking, or memory, when the student becomes something more than a student. Ansel didn't know it, but that moment was waiting for him now. It began quietly, as most such moments do, not with fanfare or great pronouncement, but with a single sound. Silence, not the peaceful kind, not like the hush before snowfall or the quiet of a house full of sleeping books. No, this silence was wrong. It came at dawn. It came with stillness. It came with every single clock in the hollow stopping at once, all except one. Ansel awoke to the stillness. The hollow clock above the stair landing still glowed faintly, ticking steady. But the rest, the cuckoos, the chimes, the workshop beetle clock that blinked on the hour, had gone utterly quiet. Even the heartbeat of the house, the quiet rhythm in the walls he'd grown so used to, was gone. He ran to Thorn. The clockmaker was already awake, sitting in his chair beside the hearth, his hands folded over a small wooden box. His face was not afraid, but it was different, as if he'd been listening to something only he could hear. "It's here," he said simply. Ansel's breath caught. "What is?" Thorn opened the box. Inside was a small, oval-shaped clock. No hands, just a single, blinking dot of light in the center. The casing was simple, carved from dark oak, smooth with age and care. Ansel stared at it. "It's not ticking." "It doesn't," Thorn said softly. "This is the hollow's hour, the one we all live inside." He looked up, eyes kind but heavy. "And it's ending." Ansel didn't speak for a long moment. He sat across from Thorn, letting the silence fill the space between them like dust on old shelves. "Why?" he finally whispered. Thorn exhaled. "Because every hollow has its time, and every keeper must one day let go." Ansel blinked fast. "Are you leaving?" "Not yet," Thorn said gently. "But soon. I've kept the clocks longer than I was meant to. The hollow has let me stay because I was afraid to stop." He smiled faintly. "I was afraid to pass the key." Ansel's throat tightened. He reached into his satchel and brought out his apprentice's journal. The last entry he'd written. 12 o'clock. When the ticking stopped, waiting for what must come. He turned the page, waited. They spent the morning preparing the hollow. It wasn't a sad thing, not really. They cleaned each face, dusted every pendulum. The map of forgotten hours glowed warmly now, full of hours remembered, released, reclaimed. Even the reverse keeper chimed once backwards in farewell. They brought out the tools, polished the brass, swept the workshop floor, hung the lanterns. And then Thorn said, "There's something I want to show you." He led Ansel through a narrow door behind the kitchen. It opened into a winding stair. They climbed in silence, past walls that whispered their names, and arrived at the top of the house. Here, in a small round room with a domed ceiling of stained glass stars, stood a single object, a cradle, and inside it a pocket watch, ticking, slow and golden. "This," Thorn said softly, "was the first hour I ever kept. My mother gave it to me when I was a boy. I didn't understand it then, but I wound it every night." Ansel stepped closer. The watch was old, lovely, worn smooth by years of care. He looked up. "Do you still wind it?" Thorn nodded. "Every day." He took the watch in both hands, then held it out. "To you?" Ansel blinked. "I can't." "You must," Thorn said, gently, "because the hollow needs a keeper." He stepped back. Ansel took the watch. It was warm and ticking. That night, Thorn disappeared. Not dramatically, not suddenly. He simply walked into the hollow clock, its glass face open wide. He smiled at Ansel once and said, "Keep the time kindly," then stepped through. The hollow clock ticked once, then returned to silence. Ansel lit every lantern in the house. He wound every clock. He carved a new gear from a soft elderwood. He added a single final entry to his book. 12:01, when I became the clockmaker, still ticking. Years passed. Children came to the hollow, drawn by whispers, by dreams, by clocks that chimed in old lullabies. They met a boy who had grown tall, who wore a pocket watch at his hip and a satchel full of feathers and threads of memory. They called him the clockkeeper. He listened, he mended, he remembered, and one day, when the time was right, he passed a small silver key to a girl who had always been just a little too early. Nettlebed Hollow never appeared on maps, but if you listened closely, you could hear it ticking. In the pause before a smile, in the hush of bedtime, in the warmth between goodbye and hello, still keeping time, still holding hours, still remembering. And that's our story for tonight. I hope it brought you a little peace, or at least something warm to carry into your dreams. If you'd like to hear more, just subscribe. I'll be right here by the fire, waiting with another tale. Sleep well now, and good night, my dear.